So this is what we're going to be covering in today's webinar. So Fiona's going to be talking about why reduce food waste, how developing practical food skills and cooking from scratch can help reduce food waste in the home, some practical tips for use in the classroom, and then for pupils and their families to use at home, being creative with ingredients, extending the shelf life of food, and then after that, I'm going to just go through a few links to Food Effective Life, and then both Fiona and I have got suggestions for further reading and sources of information. So I'm going to stop sharing my short PowerPoint now, and then Fiona will share hers, and then Fiona will present probably for about 15 to 20 minutes, and then we'll have the Q&A and the remainder of the webinar after that. So I shall stop sharing now and welcome Fiona.
Hi all, I'm just going to share my screen now. Hopefully it'll share because it did just a few minutes ago. So share. Okay, perfect. So hi all, thank you for joining us today, and thank you to Frances and Roy for having me here to present today. So as she said, I'm Dr Fiona Lavelle. I'm a research fellow in the Institute of Global Food Security in Queen's in Belfast. And I'm going to talk today about practical food skills, a bit about cooking and reducing food waste. So I'm going to start with a bit of background around reducing food waste and some of our research that links into this. Then I'm going to go through a few practical examples of reducing food waste and how we can go through these food skills. And then I'm going to give some examples around activities that could be used in schools, but I am going to acknowledge that we have a broad range of primary to secondary school teachers and also across all disciplines here, so they are going to be a bit general, but I know teachers are very much experts in tailoring to their own classes, so I'm just going to acknowledge that they are quite broad as well, and then as Frances said, I'm going to recommend some further resources as well. So just to start us off on food waste, so in 2018 9.5 million tonnes of food was wasted in the UK. And if you want to talk in economic terms, that's £19 billion to the economy, or for sustainability or climate change, that's 36 million tonnes of greenhouse gas emissions. And it could be a way that you could introduce this into your lessons as well. If you are talking about budgets or funding or economics, you can go from that angle, or obviously sustainability and climate change is a huge important topic at the moment. So if you want to bring it in through that direction as well, we could go that way. But as you can say, that's just food waste in general. What does that matter, Fiona? How much are we actually wasting at home? So if you want to look at household food waste, that's 6.6 million tonnes was wasted in 2018. And 70% of that, so 4.5 million tonnes was actually edible that was thrown away and wasted. So there's still a huge proportion and a huge percentage of the overall food waste is coming from households. And the reasons people were talking about why they threw away this food was they basically didn't use it in time, some personal preferences, and then they cooked or served too much food. So I'm going to try get some practical tips around that, that hopefully then would counteract these reasons for throwing away food. But I want to highlight that it's not all bad news. So there was a decrease in food waste by about 18% since 2007. And then also during the pandemic, our research shows that everyone took to the pan. So I know everybody has their experience maybe with a bit of banana bread going on during the pandemic, but we also found that there was a decrease in the use of ready-made ingredients and an increase in use of fresh or basic ingredients during cooking. And also people reported throwing away less food. So I'm hoping then this will impact on the next report that will come out, that it'll be reflected in it that there was less food waste. In terms of what we call food practices, so what we term more, or the organizational ones, so you're planning ahead, shopping with a list, or keeping basics in the cupboard, and they also increased during the pandemic. And this, we say, was to reduce time in shops. Obviously during the beginning of the pandemic, a lot of people were trying to minimize their time in the shop, and also then it was to help people to stick to their budget. And obviously during the pandemic there's been a massive increase in food insecurity, and this is a concept I am going to touch a little bit on budget today, but not too much. But it is a huge concern, but we're going to focus more about the waste aspects today. And then we also found an increase in management food practices. So preparing in advance, batch cooking and freezing. And this then may become more useful as time reduces again. I know obviously in the mainland UK or in England, a lot of everybody's kind of returned to work, but again, in Ireland and in Northern Ireland, we're being told to work from home again. So, you know, there is different elements and people have different levels of time as well. So these management practices can be useful when you don't have as much time. From the children aspect, during the pandemic, we saw an increase in including children in baking activities, and we were delighted to find an increase in including children in everyday meal preparation. And those who included their children more frequently actually had a higher diet quality. This is an interesting component, although it is cross-sectional research, so we can't assume a causality. This may be that parents who had a higher diet quality were more likely to include their children more frequently in these cooking activities, or it may be that by including children in their cooking activities, parents actually changed or improved their diet quality. So they might have increased their fruit and veg intake to model these behaviours with children. So this is an interesting element that we'd obviously like to do further research into, but I just said I'd highlight it for you there. And then relation to children in the kitchen, we've shown in the past that children learning cooking skills at younger ages actually impacts their dietary patterns in adults, or as adults, sorry, excuse me, and they also report wasting less food. So we know as well, though, that parents, or well, before the pandemic anyway, parents were more reluctant to include their children in kitchen activities due to that fear around children and knives and using cookers and ovens, but also they were afraid of the mess. They didn't want children making a huge mess in the kitchen. So from this, then we decided to develop evidence-based cooking skills by age for children. So we developed these based on children's developmental skills, and then also they were reviewed by an international panel of experts. And we've developed we have this guide here. So this is basically a nice little infographic of the age-appropriate cooking skills for children. And if anyone wants a PDF of that, feel free to email me and I'm happy to send it out. But you can just see that these are simple different cooking skills that you can introduce with children. And we know, although obviously cooking can be used across multiple subjects, so maths, literacy, science, geography, history. Honestly, if you want to ask me about a subject, I will find a way to introduce cooking or food into the subject. But I am very much aware that obviously schools have tight resources and are limited and may not actually, especially in primary schools, may not have the resources to implement practical cooking skills within the classrooms. So that's why today I'm going to focus more on the food skills elements and the kind of more theoretical aspects that you might be able to easier or implement into your class or subjects more easily. So from there, what we would term food skills would be kind of these 5 overarching elements. So we've got meal planning and preparation, shopping, budgeting, resourcefulness, and label reading or consumer awareness. I'm actually going to mainly focus on meal planning and preparation and resourcefulness today, but I will add a little bit at the end about shopping or shopping tips. And then I will also kind of discuss budgeting to a certain extent, but as I mentioned earlier, I am quite cautious about food insecurity, and I know this might be a more sensitive topic to talk about food budgets in your classroom. So obviously, you know, your class is better, so if you feel okay to introduce it, obviously then there's certain elements that you can introduce quite easily into the classroom as well. So I'm going to focus in on planning, storage, leftovers, and regrowing. And I am the queen of regrowing scallions or spring onions, whatever you want to call them. And this is for the simple fact that they can be regrown in purely just water. And they're also handy. They don't need that much light to regrow. And they can, if using water, you probably get about 4 regrowths out of the 1 set of spring onions or scallions. So they're very handy. And I also think it's a very interesting aspect that if, again, you may not want to use soil in the classroom, by showing children that they can regrow in just the water, it's also a nice little science aspect you can bring in. But I'll come back to regrowing at a later stage anyway. I just get too excited about regrowing my spring onions. So just quickly on keeping basics in your cupboard. So this is basically our kind of standalone start off point. If you have these basics in the cupboard, it helps you to form quick meals and also facilitates your cooking. And I know technically not a cupboard food, but it's also always handy to have a bag of frozen veg in your freezer. This aspect, I think, is very useful for, I suppose, older pupils or students that might be finishing off school and maybe then going on to live independently. So maybe if they're going on to university or higher education or further education or even apprenticeships, this might be an aspect to really drive home with these type of students, so they're able to cook independently for themselves. So this is just a basic checklist I have there, and obviously it can be tailored to people's preferences and backgrounds and whatever they would like, but it's just a handy kind of list to start off with, and then you can obviously tailor to your own preferences. You'll have to excuse me if my voice goes a bit croaky during this. I've been a bit under the weather, so just excuse me there on that. Okay, so planning. Obviously, we all fail to plan to fail. So I don't know how much people do plan, but this is where we're going to kind of tie in our resourcefulness. And what I kind of mean around resourcefulness, obviously your basics in the cupboard, which I just showed you, batch cooking and freezing. So we'll talk a bit about freezing, but not so much around the cooking today, and then using leftovers for another meal. If you haven't or not used to plan or doing weekly meal plans, it's quite easy and basic to start off with a nice little spreadsheet. Obviously, there's lots of apps you can use on your phone. And again, this weekly meal planning may be a bit more of older students, just depending on how your class is. But as I said, you are the experts and you know better. So if you want to just look across on the top line, so maybe across the breakfast line, you can see it's quite simple. And obviously breakfast, or well, for me, it'd be quite a monotonous meal, and it's quite similar day to day, but I have added a nice little treat in there on Friday. I will note that I've done a 5-day meal plan in here, so especially for if you were doing this maybe with pupils that are going on to become independent, or students that might tend to go home on a Saturday and Sunday, so their meal planning might actually not happen on a Saturday or Sunday, but you can obviously go for the full week. But I just want to then show you examples of how then you can implement some of the strategies we will talk through during your meal planning process. So if you want to see there, you've got batch cooking and freezing. So if you make your dinner on Monday, if you've got chicken and vegetable pasta, you could then freeze it and have a small portion then for your lunch on Friday. Using leftovers in another meal, you got spag bol, and then using it on a baked potato for your lunch on Wednesday. And then I just want to highlight as well the basics from the cupboard that are used to make these different meals. And then this is just, again, highlighting how using these different ingredients and in different ways will then help to avoid the food waste. So then more examples of using leftovers in another meal. So quite simply, if you have a bit of mashed potato, you could turn it into potato salad. If you have a roast chicken or roast turkey, because we're coming into that season, you can make a lovely chicken fried rice or turkey fried rice after, or you could also use the bones to make a soup or a stock for further use. And you can also freeze stock. If anyone has other suggestions that they want to pop into the box, because I always find it's great to learn and share from other people, if they have different leftovers, what they would use them in for a different meal, feel free to pop into the box. Again, for leftovers and storage. So if you have excess vegetables and scraps, you can make them into stock or soup. And as I said, you can freeze the stock. For carrots and celery, if you store them in water and change the water every 4 to 5 days, it prolongs how long they will last for you. And then bread, so you can turn your stale bread into breadcrumbs, again, stuffing, it is the Christmas season, or it also is a nice crumb on top of pasta bakes. Or also, I would like to stress that you can freeze bread. And I know economically it is better to buy, say, a full slice pan if you're going for bread. However, if you're in a smaller household or a single household, you may not get through your full slice pan. So I do want to highlight that you can freeze the bread and then use it after, or unfreeze and use it. Some further aspects, so potatoes, you store them in cool and dark places, but then if they are starting to go off, if you cook and freeze them, you can do that. Or also I will go on about, you can regrow potatoes as well. And they're also a great food to regrow, because yes, usually we traditionally would grow potatoes in the ground, but you can actually regrow them in big pots as well in your home. Fruit is a great one to freeze. So especially if it's starting to turn or go off, you can freeze most fruits. So you can freeze strawberries, grapes, chop up some bananas, and they're great little snacks, especially for kids, and I know more in the summer months, but you can use them in smoothies, or frozen bananas, great to make banana ice cream as well. Obviously freezing meats and fish, and then you have to be very careful on thawing them out appropriately. And then dicing onions and garlic in bulk and freezing them, because obviously you don't want to be crying every day chopping onions, or you don't want your fingers swelling of garlic every day. So it's really handy if you chop and freeze them and have them there. And you can also freeze herbs in olive oil or water, and they're also very handy to then take a block and use it, throw it in the pan and use it for cooking as well. So I just want to highlight a few safety tips, but the slides will be shared as well. And that's also a note then. I have hyperlinked all the references within the slides, so you'll be able to access them as well. So just on the consumer labeling, I know we have a broad range of teachers here. So if you may not be familiar on the food aspect, so use by dates are actually a food safety mark. So it does become dangerous to eat food past that use by date. Whereas best before is more about the quality of the food produce. So they are safe to eat after the best before date, but the quality of the product mightn't be as good. For storage of foods, obviously, if you've gone leftovers, you want to cool them down as quickly as possible, and then freeze or store in the fridge and eat within 2 days. As I said, defrosting, you want to defrost thoroughly before reheating it. And then for reheating, obviously you want to make sure the food reaches 70 degrees Celsius. So as I was on about my lovely regrowing, I am going to show you a little clip here. So you're not just listening to me the whole time, although I may interrupt through the video. So I've just picked this video, but there are lots of videos on YouTube, and you can get examples of lots of different vegetables and fruit that you can regrow. And I think this is a great activity to use in classrooms, especially in primary schools, where they're great examples of science or even sustainability, whatever angle you're going for, or how you're introducing food into your curriculum. And as I said, I know before you freak out and you don't want soil, you can imagine it being pulled across the whole classroom. There are different fruits and vegetables that can just be regrown using water, although I know some children can still manage to make quite a mess with water, but maybe less of a mess than soil. And obviously regrowing fruit and vegetables, yeah, not only is good for sustainability, food waste, it's a great example of showing science, but it does help the pocket and your budget as well. There's my lovely scallions or spring onions there. And they do say you have to change it to soil, but you can, as I said, regrow just with water there. But as I said, it is great, and you can find lots of different videos as well that show different examples and different vegetables. So if you're not inclined to any of those fruits or vegetables, you can find different ones. Okay, so now I'm going to just suggest a few school activities. I am going to aim one at younger students or primary school age, and then maybe one at older students as well, or pupils. So what I've kind of called a food web. So basically what we're trying to instill in children from a young age is this element of creativity. So to understand the different components or ingredients within meals, and then what else those ingredients or what other foods those ingredients are. So as they grow up, they'll be so used to the different ingredients and how they can interact with different meals, they'll be able to use leftovers in other meals, but then also create different meals out of the different ingredients. So I'm starting off here with a lasagna, and I chose to start off with a lasagna as well to show that for this food webs, although I'm obviously concentrating on just the spread and the creativity, you can bring in so many different aspects. So you could look at obviously geography, so pasta would be well known with Italy, and you can talk about that side. You can talk about where food comes from, so obviously tomatoes being grown and mince coming from cows. So there's so many different angles and elements, and I also want to stress that obviously teachers know their different classes. So I'm obviously doing this online because it's a webinar, but it could obviously be done with pictures and crafts, or it could be drawn, or bring in art into it. So there's so many different angles or elements you can introduce through this. But so I just want to show how what I would term the food web. So if you start off with your lasagna, okay, you spare tomatoes left, make a tomato soup. What else goes into your tomato soup? You've got your potatoes, stock, and onions. From there, what else could you make from your different ingredients? A burger. So your tomatoes, mince, and onions could go into making your burger. What else is in your burger? Or what else do you need for your burger? You need cheese, lettuce, and bread, or a bap, or a bun, depending on where you are, what you call it. And from there, what else could you make with those ingredients? You go on to a pasta bake with your white sauce, and then you can keep going on and expanding out this web. And it just helps then children to see that all these different foods can be combined to create different meals. And I have my little Twitter handle there. If anyone does decide to do a food web, I'd love to see pictures of the different webs. So feel free to tweet me pictures if you are going to use this activity. But again, it's just trying to get this creative element starting early in children and driving it up. And obviously, depending on the different ages of the children, you could go into more complex food webs and spread out as far as you would like. So for the older pupils, I am going to talk a bit more about budgeting and trying to bring in a bit of value for money. And as I said, I'm stressing the caution around the food insecurity, especially during the pandemic or since the pandemic. It may be a bit more of a sensitive topic in certain classrooms. But just as an example for this, so a Big Mac meal with chips and a Coke in, I think it was a Belfast McDonald's, was £5.71. And you can debate after how cheap or dear that is, I don't know, relatively. But if you look, and I think I used Asda, but again, I'm not inclined to any brands in particular, I just went for that one. Can you make the same meal for that price? And of course you can, but what are the differences? So time, obviously, organization, effort, quantity. So there is the potential for food waste. And then this is the extra element then after that we want to highlight what you do with the extra food. And obviously then, depending on your subject, you can talk about the healthiness and maybe the different nutritional quality between eating a Big Mac meal from McDonald's and making it for yourself at home. And as I said, you can do this with any different food. So if you're more inclined to fish and chip on a Friday or a curry, you can obviously use those as examples. And you can also take away the money aspect as well and just look at the raw ingredients. So probably so your Big Mac meal and the food ingredients if you were to make it yourself, and just exclude the money element of it. So as I was saying about the potential for leftovers from that. So in theory, we're saying there's potentially maybe 2 burgers left over, half a bag of potatoes, probably more than half, but we'll just say half for easiness now, lettuce, cheese slices. So this is where the kind of creativity element comes in, and that we're trying to get students thinking about what else they can do with the food. So if you have your store cupboard or your checklist, what else could you make with that food? So if anyone wants to pop in, if they have any thoughts around what they would potentially make with those leftovers, please feel free to pop it into the chat. I'll give you a few seconds there to pop it in. Anyone wants to? Okay, perfect. So then for me, if I was looking at that, I would go, okay, if I mash up the mince and boil the potatoes and make mashed potatoes, I could make a cottage pie out of that. I'm looking at my checklist. I mightn't have tomato puree, but I use a tin of tomatoes and make it slightly a bit more of a tomatoey cottage pie. And I'd probably put in a bit of the peas there as well. I could potentially have a little bit of a side salad as well if I wanted, with a bit of lettuce and maybe the corn. And unfortunately, I'd put a bit of cheese singles on top. Wouldn't be my original choice if I was making it, but you can put a bit of cheese singles on top instead of sprinkling a bit of cheese for your cottage pie there. So that's basically an example of what else could you make. So you show obviously the ingredients, and you show then there's potential for leftovers, and what would you make with your store cupboard ingredients. I just said quickly I'd go through some shopping tips as well. So obviously I think everyone is aware of this one now, but it's eat before you go, know your budget and have planned your meal. So obviously, again, back to our meal planner, again, you don't have to necessarily do it out and write it out. You could do it on your phone, or some people are very good at doing it in their heads. I'll say know the offers. So beforehand, obviously now with everything online, it's very easy to check special offers. And the golden rule, use a list. Again, doesn't necessarily have to be written out. It could be in your phone, or it also could be a mental list, but have an idea of what you need to buy. So for your shopping list, again, I'm going to stress note your budget. Look at your weekly meal plan before you go. What ingredients do you need that are not in the cupboard? So obviously you have your staples in your cupboard. What extra do you need? Double check. So you might have hungry housemates, you might have a hungry family that you may think you have some ingredients, and they might have had at least a late night pasta meal. So just double check. And what I will say is always add a treat. And I'm not necessarily saying add sweets or chocolate, but I am saying if you are making and want to stick to your meal plan, it's always good to have a treat meal on there as well. So it could be on a Friday, have a fake away, and you're going to make the ingredients. So if you're trying to stick to this meal plan, I always suggest adding that treat on to your shopping list, so it will help you stick to it, because you still have that fun extra added meal in. A note on the offers. I know people can get pulled in by the offers and buy added elements that they don't need, but if they're used correctly, they can be used well. So shop the offers to stretch that budget, so substitute ingredients on your list. And this is where then when you develop that creativity, you'll start learning to, okay, I can swap turkey for chicken. And that's when it helps to map out those meals and see where they're all different connected, and see then where your potential swaps are. Know the time or day your local shop reduces down the food, and the majority of those foods can be frozen to use at a later date. So especially say if you were meal planning and you saw, okay, you thought you might have a bit of mackerel on a Friday, your fish and chips, but you saw that they had an offer on cod, but it was out of date, then you could obviously freeze it and use it then on the Friday. And also buy your store cupboard essentials when they are on offer. It's always handy to stock up and keep your cupboard essentials ready and there. So that's me. I just want to highlight some of the different resources on the Food Effective Life site. There are so many more, and obviously once you click onto one, you can continue on and find different resources as well. And so there are just a few more relevant articles from my research that might be of interest to you, and then a few articles I've written for the conversation, especially around cooking during the pandemic. And also feel free if anyone wants to drop me an email or has any further questions, or if you want to tweet away as well or tweet at me, I'm happy to answer and engage with different people about food education. I just find it so fascinating. And as I said, if anyone does do any of the activities, please feel free to tweet me some pictures. I'd love to see the different results. So I'd like to say thank you for taking part, and I'm happy to answer any questions you may have. Stop sharing here.
Great, thank you, Fiona. That was really useful, and I've certainly written down some questions to ask you shortly. So I'm just going to share my screen again, and I'm just going to go through just some more activities that we've got on Food Effective Life website, which relate to what you've been talking about. And so we've got some general cooking resources, and we've got those for all of the age phases, and lots and lots of resources linked to ingredient choice, planning what to cook, the actual cooking of the ingredients, and then obviously the practical food skills that you're going to need. We do actually have over 600 different activities that we wrote for homeschooling last year under our remote learning activities. The area is now moved, it's now in whole school. So if you go to the website and think, oh, they're all gone, they are still there, but they're in the whole school area. And there are a lot around using leftovers, being creative, using food skills, cooking at home, etc. So you might want to have a look at those and use those in the classroom as well as using them for home. We've also got a variety of interactive activities, and I've put a couple of examples on there. So we've got some recipe videos, which we've actually sort of programmed to pause at certain points, and then there are questions that the pupils have to answer at each stage. So they're quite fun to watch and quite a good homework or a class activity. And then we've got other resources which have got what we call hotspots on, and then the pupils can just click on the image or where the hotspot is, and then there'll be a question or there'll be more information or an activity that they've got to do. We've got a using leftovers activity and presentation, and with the activity there's some instructions for the teacher and then some cards, and then the pupils, the teacher would cut up the cards, and then the pupils would then have to choose a number of the cards and then identify a recipe that they would have to make from those cards. And then also we've got a list of store cupboard items, a bit like Fiona was suggesting, that they can also use as well, and then some sustainability pointers, so some ingredients that are going to be in season. We've also got some Learn with Stories, which are for our younger pupils, and there are some lovely ones around sort of cooking and ingredients and using food in a creative way. And then we've also got our early years activity packs, and our colleague Claire has recently written 6 new packs. And we've got one around amazing allotments, which is lovely. So that would then link in nicely to the growing aspect of this, as well as an area we've got on the website, which has got some sort of teachers and school support around growing. That again is in the whole school area. We've got lots and lots of recipes, over 300 tried and tested recipes, and we're actually developing some new recipes over the next few months to try and make the recipes we've got a little bit more diverse and inclusive. So if you've got any ideas of the kind of recipes that we could focus on, then please do let us know. And then we've also got a brand new area which is focusing on resources for pupils with additional needs. And there are some resources on there, particularly around planning what to eat and also shopping. And so new resources only recently been uploaded. And a lot of what Fiona's been talking about is about sustainability and food waste, etc. We've got new areas on the website in each age phases, which contains resources associated with healthy, sustainable diets. So they are going to be added to over the next few months, and hopefully you'll be able to use those to support your teaching. And then there's just some additional information that you might find useful. We do have a new website, British Nutrition Foundation. So there's lots of information on there, particularly about healthy, sustainable diets. There's also this meal planner, which is the BNF Try, Swap and Change planner, which I think is a really nice activity that you could do with the pupils. I also thought it would be a good idea just to mention about food safety and thinking about using leftovers and minimising food waste but being safe about it. And the Food Standards Agency has got a very good area which is all about the home food fact checker, and it talks about the safety about reheating food and the time in which you should reheat food, particularly things like rice and meat-based products. And then also it's got a Christmas food hygiene area as well, which I think is quite appropriate at the moment. And then of course there's the Love Food, Hate Waste website, which is run by WRAP, which has got some really good information, lots of hints and tips, different recipe ideas, and some statistics. And then thinking about gardening as well, the Royal Horticultural Society Campaign for School Gardening is a good website to have a look at. And then there's also the main WRAP website too. So I'm just going to talk about some training, and then we'll ask some questions to Fiona. So we've got some webinars coming up. We have actually arranged a food styling and presentation masterclass for January, and I'm very pleased that we've got somebody called Chris Cohen presenting for us for that. He runs an organisation called Feasted, based in Stoke-on-Trent, and is an ex-food and nutrition teacher. We've also got a webinar about careers in food and drink, which is in March. And then we've got some practical workshops coming up. And I've just noticed that we've got one on there which has gone, unfortunately. So that was in December, so that was last weekend. But we do actually have some more coming up in January and February. And those are around food science and food skills, practical applications. And we also have online courses available too. And we've got a special offer just for the next month or so that our food science courses, we have 3 food science courses, one about functional properties of food, one around food science, and one around food spoilage, food hygiene and safety. And those are usually £45, but as a special offer and to celebrate 30 years of Food Facts of Life, where there are 300 free access codes available for each of those courses. It's first come, first served. So once they're gone, there won't be any more. So if you're interested in doing that course, you haven't done it before, say those 3 courses, do have a look on the website and register for a free access code. So next then really is just to say thank you to Fiona, but also to ask some questions. So I'm actually going to start my video again and see if Fiona would like to join us too and ask you some questions, Fiona. So thank you again for your presentation. That was really interesting and lots of different hints and tips and things that people can use at home, but also give advice to parents and carers and also to the pupils that they can do in the classroom and then also at home as well. So some of the questions that I've written down, and we've had some from the people on the call today or the webinar today in advance. So one I've got is, do you have a top tip for minimising food waste?
Okay.
Number 1 top tip.
Number 1, just if you're cooking now. I suppose it's probably more about trying to generate that creativity element that I was talking about. We're not actually sure technically yet if it is a teachable skill, but we're hoping that if we start it younger and younger and build up that element of knowing, then if you say you open your fridge and you have a pepper left and you have an onion and you're like, what can I make? And then if you keep your basics in your cupboard, I can make maybe a veggie pasta or something. So it's that kind of element of trying to, I don't know, it's about I suppose it is the cooking element. So obviously trying to get people to cook in the beginning, but then it's this teaching this element around what can go into foods, or that changing or substituting or swapping. So if you don't necessarily have everything in the recipe list, can you swap something and make it something else?
Great.
No, probably not one tip, but
no, that's perfect, and I'll put you on the spot with that one. So following on from that, actually, we've got suggestions for encouraging cooking at home. So again, have you got any suggestions that you can think of?
Start them young. No, so obviously that's why we then try to develop the guidelines for the different age appropriate skills. So it is about trying to get kids to start earlier, but also because obviously parents don't want the mess, and it can be extra hassle to include children, and we are aware of this. It's about then teaching them the other end of cooking. You're cleaning up, that you have to clean up after, you have to take care of the food safety aspect of cleaning and making sure you keep your area kind of clean. So it's just basically let the children in and have a bit of fun. When they create the mess, then it's encourage them to clean. Obviously the first few times it's going to be a bit messy, but hopefully then as they keep going, they will start to learn to clean if you keep drilling that into them. And we have ran a few different cooking interventions for children and younger children, and the element of cleaning at the end, and the parents were shocked then after, once it was kind of drilled into them, every time we cook we clean, every time we cook we clean. They did start cleaning then when they were in their own home again. So it is kind of, I know for parents it's probably helping them to realize that eventually the mess will go, but just giving them a go and let them mess the first few times, I suppose.
Great. No, that's brilliant. Thank you. And then one final question really was, obviously you've done the research looking at the evidence-based food skills by sort of age, and from your research it says 9+. Are you thinking about doing any sort of further research, thinking about sort of teenagers and young people?
Well, I would love to. So if anyone knows of any funding opportunities, I'm happy. So that kind of 9+ is the avenue of, like, children should then, they all have the developmental skills to continue on. They're obviously just a bit more safety elements to it. We would love to do a lot more around well, I suppose secondary school age children, I suppose, if we're going to phrase it that way. And I do work a lot with the Home Economics University in the Republic of Ireland as well. So, and they do want to do a lot more research around cooking outside of the environment for those teenagers at that point as well. So hopefully in the future, I would love to do a lot more around it. And it's about, again, encouraging those pupils or students to cook again in the home environment, because I know obviously, I know in England, home ec isn't a subject, whereas I know in the Republic of Ireland, Northern Ireland and Scotland, I'm pretty sure it's still maybe under different titles or names, but they do have that element, where there's no compulsory element in the Republic. There is in the North, and I think Scotland has a compulsory element. So then it's obviously trying to reach all the rest of those of teenagers that don't get the exposure. So yeah, hopefully.
In England we have compulsory up to the end of what we call Key Stage 3 if it's a state maintained secondary school. But yes, I do know what you mean. There are elements where it's not necessarily compulsory. Right, well, that is absolutely brilliant. Thank you ever so much. We really appreciate your time and the information that you've given us this afternoon. Just to say to everybody that's joined us as well, thank you very much for giving up your time on a busy Wednesday at the end of, I'm sure, a very, very busy term.